So today I want to go over something that I haven't seen a ton of yet, which is an arc-focused Prismatic Warlock build. Now to start off, we have to go over our exotic armor piece, and we're not going to be using an exotic class item, so this is going to be more solo friendly. Now we're using Crown of Tempest that reads Arc ability or Jolt Final Blows increases the recharge rate of your arc abilities and extends the duration of Storm Trance. So normally how this works is when you get those Arc or Jolt Final Blows, you get a stack of Conduction Tines, which is a buff that lasts for 7 seconds, stacks up 3 times, and every stack gives you more and more increased recharge rate for your grenade, your melee, and your super. Now this normally reads it only recharges arc abilities, but in Prismatic it recharges anything. Let's say we're using the Song of Flame super, getting Conduction Times will increase the recharge rate of your super, so it works on all abilities. And the last part of this is that it extends the duration of Storm Trance. Now how this normally works is your Conduction Times, depending on how many stacks you have, will reduce the drain rate of Storm Trance when you're in it, and at 3 stacks it's a 66% reduction in that drain rate. This also works with Prismatic, so if you have 3 stacks of Conduction Tines and you go into Song of Flame super, it will reduce the passive drain rate of Song of Flame when you have that buff active. Now the big issue with this last portion is that you can't get arc ability final blows in any of the other roaming supers because it changes their abilities. You won't have any arc abilities. You could try to use a weapon with Jolt Shot to refresh Conduction Tines when you're in one of those supers, but I don't think that's at all worthwhile using. So the main way you can make use of the last effect is to just get 3 stacks of Conduction Tines right before you pop your, say, Song of Flame, and then the first 6 or 7 seconds will have reduced drain rate. But the primary thing we're using this for is getting arc ability kills will give us massive regen for all of our abilities. But that brings us to our ability choices. Now at a base, I'm going to be using Song of Flame. I've gone over this in every build and I've used it in pretty much every build. Song of Flame is just incredibly strong, and it's still really strong in this build because you're going to be getting it back so quickly. You can also use things like Cataclysm or Needle Storm. They're going to have almost a minute less base cooldown, so you can get them back much quicker, and they're fire and forgets, so you just fire them off and then you're back to using your normal abilities and weapons. So both of these are actually going to be good options, and I kind of want to use them just because I've been using Song of Flame so much. Pretty much any 3 of these are going to be worthwhile in this build. Now our class ability, we're using Phoenix Dive because it has the lowest cooldown to proc some other effects. Then for our melee and grenade, we're going to be using arc abilities because we want to get those Conduction Time stacks. So our melee, we're using Chain Lightning, which is just an extended melee, jolts your targets and chain lightnings to everything. And then while amplified, it has more chain lightnings, so just good AoE damage. Any kill we get with this gonna give us those Conduction Time stacks. And then we're using Storm Grenade that just calls down a bunch of lightning storms. This was actually buffed for the final shape. It actually does good damage, and because of one of our fragments, Storm Grenade is also gonna jolt, and jolt will also give us Conduction Time. So both of our abilities are just going to be stacking our exotic buff. And then for our aspects, we're using Feed the Void. Defeat a target with any ability to give you Devour, and Devour's effects are increased. So we get Devour, we heal a ton on every kill, get a ton of grenade energy back. And then for our second aspect, we're using Hellion. When you use your class ability, you summon a solar mortar that just lobs solar projectiles at enemies. This can scorch and ignite. It does a lot of damage. It also counts as an ability for ability kills to give us Devour from Feed the Void. Hellion is just so incredibly strong, and I do think it's the best option here. You could go Lightning Surge, but I don't think Lightning Surge is really worthwhile, especially when we're already using Chain Lightning, and we'd much rather have Hellion for the extra damage. Then for our fragments, Facet of Hope, when you have an elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly, just so we can have Hellion up as much as possible. Facet of Balance, rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy, rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy. But we'll be getting melee back from all of our ability kills, and the main weapon we're using is darkness, so we'll be getting more grenade energy back. Then Facet of Awakening, rapidly defeating targets with lighter darkness damage or super final blows, generates an elemental pickup of the matching type. Now we'll be primarily getting 3 of these. Fire Sprites will be generated from our Hellion for more grenade energy. Our melee and our grenade will be giving us Ionic Traces that gives us some ability energy for all of our abilities, so more regen. And then I'm primarily using a strand weapon, so I'll be able to create tangles as well. And then we have Facet of Sacrifice. While you have an Arc, Solar, or Void buff, ability Final Blows grant darkness transcendence energy. This is to help us just get more darkness energy. We'll pretty much always have one of these buffs, so just all ability kills gives us more dark transcendence. And then Facet of Dominance are Arc Grenade Jolts. This will also make our Transcendence Grenade weaken as well, which is pretty strong as well. And then we have our artifact. First row, you can use whatever you want depending on what you want to use to counter champions. Second row, overcharge armory. Weapons with a dealer's choice or other origin traits are always overcharged when that modifier is active. Going to be using a lot of dealer's choice weapons. Then winning hand. When using weapons with a dealer's choice origin trait, combatant precision final blows or rapidly defeating combatants cause them to explode, dealing solar damage. This is increased with more dealer's choice weapons, so just more AoE damage when using those weapons. Press the advantage. Breaking a combatant's shield grants increased weapon stability, handling, and reload speed. Then a threaded blast, destroying a tangle with a strand weapon, creates a larger and more damaging explosion. The main weapon I'm using is strand. We can create tangles, and threaded blast actually does quite a lot of damage. The AoE is massive and does decent damage. Counter energy. When you or a member of your fire team stun a champion, get energy for release charge ability. Radiant orbs. When we pick up an orb of power, we become radiant. That's a main way we become radiant. And then galvanic armor. When we are amplified, we take reduced damage. And the main way we get amplified is just getting kills with our arc abilities. Then the final row, shield crush. When you have a woven mail, frost armor, or void overshield, your melee recharges faster and deals increased damage. We won't have that a ton, but while you're amplified or radiant, which we'll always have, your grenade recharges faster and deals increased damage. Just much easier to throw out more grenades, get more kills, get more of our exotic stacks. Then transference, gain increased grenade and melee damage while transcendent, and weapon final blows while transcendent, refund light and dark energy after it ends. Now the first part of this is really good because our transcendence grenade is really good, but we keep our chain lightning melee, so while we're in transcendent, we can use our melee. That's going to have more damage. It's just going to be chain lightning and jolting everything. We get kills with that. We get conduction tines from our exotic, which will then help us recharge our grenade in transcendence even quicker, and the transcendence grenade is really strong. So this all works together to just give you abilities ridiculously quickly. And then for our armor mods, starting with our helm, we have Ashes to Assets to gain bonus super energy on grenade kills, Special Ammo Finder to get more special ammo because I'm primarily using that, and then Strand Siphon to create orbs of power from our strand weapons, which is the main weapon I'm using. Then for our gauntlets, we're going to be using firepower. Your grenade final blows create orbs of power. We're using heavy-handed. Your powered melee final blows create orbs of power. Again, this just synergizes with getting kills with our arc abilities to get conduction tines. Now we get orbs of power, and then impact induction, causing damage with a powered melee attack reduces your grenade cooldown. Our grenades are actually pretty strong damage-wise, so we want that up as much as possible. Then for our chest armor, you're just using whatever damage reduction you want, depending on what content you're doing. Then for our leg armor, we're going to be using Absolution ×2, reduces all ability cooldowns each time you pick up an orb of power, which we'll be creating a decent amount of. And then Innervation, reduces grenade cooldown each time you pick up an orb of power. And then finally, we have our class item. 2 stacks of distribution, reduces all ability cooldowns when using your class ability near targets. We have a low cooldown on our Phoenix dive, so that'll be up a lot. And then Reaper, shortly after using your class ability, your next weapon final blow spawns an orb of power. Just more orbs of power, which will help get our other abilities back more quickly, helping to synergize with everything about our build. And then for our weapons, we're using something very similar to all of my other builds because these weapons are so strong. We're using the dealer's choice weapon, starting with a call. This is just probably the most used and strongest legendary weapon in the game now. Pretty much always going to be using this, but this has the dealer's choice origin trait, so final blows with this weapon gives you super energy. This stacks up with the more dealer's choice weapons you have, so we're just using 2 other dealer's choice weapons, so we get 1 kill with our weapon, we get a lot of super energy back. Then as we're getting ability kills, we have conduction tines, massively increasing our super regeneration, so we'll just be getting our super back extremely quickly. Now when you're doing harder content and want to counter champions much more easily, I've just been switching to a pulse rifle for my secondary, so that counters barrier. We already have a sidearm to counter unstoppable. Then I've been using Thunderlord, which has intrinsic counter to overloads. Now you don't actually need Thunderlord as much in this build because all of our abilities are jolting targets, which counters overload normally, so you could use anything else you want. You could use a Dragon's Breath that's super good boss damage mixed with Song of Flame. You could use Galahorn. Now something with intrinsic overload is going to be easier to counter overloads to make sure you don't have to have one of your abilities. Either of your abilities guarantees jolts, so you can counter overload that way pretty easily. And just a small disclaimer with this build, this is going to be a bit more focused on not doing super high-end content. Like this can still do GM level content, but because you need to get final blows with arc abilities to get any benefit from our exotic, it's not going to be as good in Grandmaster content, because usually in Grandmasters, you're not going to be getting a ton of kills just by throwing your grenade at something and it dealing all the damage. But in most other content, onslaught, seasonal activities, lower difficulty strikes, farming in the Pale Heart, pretty much all that stuff, you can throw a grenade at something and it's probably at least going to get 1 kill. If you're in GMs, probably not going to happen as much, but I've already been doing masters with this, and it still works completely fine for that as well. But that's the entirety of this arc-focused Prismatic Warlock build. This has been incredibly fun. I've just been a fan of Crown of Tempest, and I really like arc builds in Destiny 2, even though they do seem a bit weaker in general right now, but still incredibly fun. You're just amplified, sprinting around everywhere. Jolts are going off everywhere. You're getting your supers back pretty quickly. So this build still is incredibly strong and very solo friendly because you can just go get the Crown of Tempest every hole anytime you want. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.
Radial area pressure is building up again underground, but I can't tell where. Scans are all coming up blank.
Scout over land and you should see traces, Guardian.
Threshold rendering assistance. Did anyone see who knocked the captain's data out? Because you should return the favor. Never say I do nothing for you, Captain. I am a born helper.
Have erected an algorithmic acceleration farm. It must be dismantled. It's self-replicating. You'll need to interrupt its connections in specific sequence.